This is Tony from Rudy's Travels, and welcome back to the channel. In our last video, we began our road trip by leaving New York in the winter, heading down the East Coast and hanging out in Florida for a while. We took a Caribbean cruise, flew out to Oakland to see our grandson Finley, and then continued our trip through the Florida Panhandle beaches with a brief stop through Baton Rouge, Louisiana, before heading into the great state of Texas. There was a lot we wanted to see in Texas, and we spent around 4 weeks traveling all around. Our first stop was Galveston Island State Park, where we stayed at the newly renovated campground right on the beach. The campground is essentially a large RV park, which is not our preferred type of campground, but the location just over the dunes made it worthwhile. We enjoyed several beautiful sunrises over the Gulf of Mexico. Daily walks on the beach after work. And a nice meal at a local seafood restaurant. We then headed down the Texas coast to Padre Island National Seashore, which is just outside of Corpus Christi. Padre Island was first come, first served with no reservations. But we were fortunate enough to find a nice spot at the Malaquit Beach Campground, which is a paved area just over the dunes off of the Gulf of Mexico. As we arrived early in the afternoon on a Friday, there were several choices available, but the sites were all taken by the end of the day. Another option would have been to simply camp on the beach nearby, since the seashore extends for over 60 miles. However, as the weather was a bit windy at times, the location behind the dunes provided good protection. We spent 4 nights at Padre Island and had generally pleasant weather. Rudy loves the beach, so he had a great time. As in Galveston, we were treated to several beautiful Gulf of Mexico sunrises. After our beach visits were over, we headed back to civilization to the city of Austin, where we stayed in a lovely Airbnb just north of the city. Austin is the capital of Texas, and we timed our visit to coincide with the South by Southwest Festival. We had some lovely meals and spent time with our friends Sue and Rich, who flew in from New York to enjoy Austin with us. Checked out the different bands playing all over the city. spent St. Patrick's Day bar hopping, band watching, overeating, and having a great time. Our next stop was San Antonio, which is just a short 80-mile drive to the southwest. We found a lovely private campground where we stayed for a couple of nights while we checked out the city. Of course, the prime attraction was the Riverwalk, which was incredible. San Antonio Riverwalk is accessible by walking below street level and has plenty of boutiques, cafes, restaurants, bars, etc. Rudy especially enjoyed walking all around and checking out all the places along the river. Boat rides as well, but we didn't do any of that since we had Rudy with us. We also checked out the San Antonio Missions, which is a National Park Service site and the only UNESCO World Heritage Site in Texas, which was right around the corner from our campground. After departing San Antonio, it was time to continue our trip by heading to West Texas and starting out the out west part of our trip. Our next stop was Seminole Canyon State Historical Park, which was a 3-hour drive west from San Antonio. We passed through a couple of Border Patrol checkpoints along the way. And finally, we arrived at Seminole and set up camp and enjoyed a beautiful sunset. We took a guided tour of the various cave paintings and pictographs in the area. The best part of our stay at Seminole was meeting our new travel buddies, Jane and John from Quebec. They set up their Airstream right next to us, and before we knew it, we were having killer old fashions at happy hour. As it turns out, they were heading in the same direction as us, staying at Big Bend in the next week. So we made plans to meet up there for a hike and have some cold ones. But first, a stop at a very cool shop called the Z-Bar Trading Company in Sanderson, Texas, on the way to Big Bend. They had all kinds of trinkets and decorations, many of which were handmade in Mexico. We purchased a tequila shot glass set and a unique Margaritaville sign made of welded metal, which we knew would be perfect in the lanai of our new home being built in Margaritaville in South Carolina. We finally arrived at the entrance to Big Bend and drove the lengthy entrance road to the Chisos Basin Campground. Chisos is nestled in an open woodland with a scenic mountain basin with breathtaking views of Casa Grande and Emery Peak. No big rigs are allowed in Chisos due to the winding road and small sites, but we made it there just fine with our 15-foot hiker trailer towed by our Jeep. We set up camp and hung up our Margaritaville sign to get ready for an exciting week. Big Bend is a vast and majestic national park, and we ventured out first to the Santa Elena Canyon Trail. In order to access the trail, we had to either do a water crossing or climb a user-defined trail up the cliff. We opted to stay dry on the way in by scaling the cliff. The canyon has walls towering over 1,500 feet, with water flowing through where kayaks and canoes could be seen. After exploring the canyon area, we headed back via the water crossing, since the descent down the cliff wall seemed a bit tricky. The The next day had beautiful weather, so we took the top down on the Jeep and headed over to Canyon. There you're able to cross the Rio Grande into Mexico, as long as you have your passport with you, or a burro will take you into town for lunch or shopping. We did not venture into Mexico since Rudy was not allowed to make the crossing, so instead we hiked around the area and took in the magnificent views. We hiked separately since we had Rudy with us and was not allowed on the trail. And he kept a sharp lookout for Sharon while we waited in the Jeep for her to return. On the drive back to the Chisos campground, we stopped to check out the hot springs. That evening, we relaxed at the campsite and enjoyed the sights and sounds of nature that surrounded us. As with the majority of national parks in the western part of the U.S., dogs are not allowed on most, if not all, of the hiking trails. There were a couple of shorter trails that Rudy was allowed on, so we made sure to take him on a hike or two when we could.
Even if we weren't hiking, Rudy really enjoyed just driving around the park in the Jeep, checking out all the sights. The views from our campground were simply spectacular. Later that week, our new friends from Quebec, along with two friends of theirs from Virginia that were staying with them in their Airstream in nearby Terralingua, met us at our campsite where Sharon joined them for a hike on the Window Trail, which runs from the Chisos campground. I stayed back to take care of Rudy and took another short hike with him. Rudy is always on a constant lookout for any prey he can find in the wild. He found none, and luckily none found him. With our glorious week in Big Bend coming to an end, we celebrated with another fun happy hour and bid a sad goodbye to our travel buddies for the time being.